have to open this video by referencing Spider-Man because it's going to make sense. Okay. With great power comes great responsibility. And what that is implying in this context is that the more insulin sensitive that you get by doing good things, by, eating less refined carbohydrates, modulating caloric intake, intermittent fasting, by improving insulin sensitivity, you actually have to pay more attention to the carbohydrates that you consume because you become more sensitive to the negative effects of insulin as well as the positive effects. You see, the positive side to being insulin sensitive, you suck up more glucose into the muscle quicker. You get a quicker response after you work out and you consume some carbohydrates to replenish you. The downside is you have a more amplified effect in terms of the anti-lipolytic, anti-fat burning effects of insulin. So for that to make sense, let's break it down a little bit. You see, insulin has an anti-lipolytic effect. Okay, now, some people like to have a heyday with this and take it a little too far, but it's pretty simple. Insulin stands in the way of hormone-sensitive lipase breaking down fat. We have fat that's stored in our body, okay, and that fat is called an adipocyte, okay, and this is going to be a triglyceride form. It's going to be a glycerol with 3 fatty acids. When we burn fat, we break the fatty acids off of the glycerol. Well, what happens is we have adrenaline, and adrenaline triggers hormone-sensitive lipase to act like a pair of scissors and cut the fatty acids off the glycerol so that we can burn the fats. Well, what insulin does is insulin comes in, and because insulin is working on a completely different axis, insulin basically stops the hormone-sensitive lipase from being able to cut the fat off. Okay, it's like if you had a chain of dominoes and all of a sudden you removed one of the dominoes, the chain wouldn't be able to flow, right? Now, this can be very, very, very minute and very small, in a very small fraction of time, or it can be pretty grandiose depending on the situation, right? The fact is that we have to be very aware of this, okay? Now, insulin also has a lipogenic effect, meaning it can trigger fat storage. But it doesn't mean that it automatically is going to trigger fat storage. So I don't want you freaking out about insulin. But the way that insulin can trigger fat storage is that it activates pyruvate dehydrogenase and it activates acetyl coenzyme A carboxylase. What these 2 enzymes do is they drive what's called de novo lipogenesis, new fat accumulation. So do the math. If you're more sensitive to insulin, that means you're going to have an amplified effect from the insulin when it is present. So we have to kind of break this down. I've got a really interesting study that was done with intermittent fasting that shows us exactly how this works. And I don't want you getting scared. This is still a very good thing. What it comes down to is if you are concerned about gaining fat and you're doing a lower carb protocol or you are doing an intermittent fasting regime, you absolutely do need to be concerned with how much you are spiking your insulin. I mean, you can do simple things. What I would recommend, today's sponsor, by the way, is Lakanto. Check them out. So if you're baking, if you're cooking, if you're doing any kind of recipes that you want to be able to make lower carb, definitely try them out. They are a monk fruit sweetener, but they're really unique because compared to a lot of the other monk fruit sweeteners that are out there, like the Splenda sweeteners, like the True Earth, things like that, Lakanto uses a cool technology. So what they've done is they've taken an erythritol molecule, or erythritol grain rather, and they've spray coated it with monk fruit. So it's evenly coated with monk fruit. Okay, when you look at the competitors, what they do is they take a granule of erythritol and a small granule of monk fruit and whatever. So you don't get an even mixture. So you're ending up with skewed amounts of erythritol, skewed amounts of monk fruit, whereas Lakanto has a really unique technology with that. They were also arguably one of the first to market when it came down to the monk fruit sweetener, so you got to give them some huge credit there. I went ahead and I put a link down below. I did an interesting comparison when I looked at the different kinds of monk fruit sweeteners, like the Splenda one, the True Earth one, some of the other ones, and it was really interesting even to see the smell difference and also the granule difference and just the color. Like some of them were like really odd color, like pure white, like it was bleached. I don't know, who knows? But anyway, it's just very interesting. So Lakanto put a link down below in the description. Okay, that's a special discount link for you to try Lakanto. And again, it's just for a way for you to sweeten things up without having the insulin spike. So if you're concerned about that, you're concerned about the anti-lipolytic effect, or you're concerned about the lipogenic effect, this would be a good route for you to go, even if you're not doing low carb, just to be able to kind of modulate that a little bit more. So again, that link is down below. So now we have to get to the downside of this whole insulin sensitivity thing. There was a study study that was published in the Journal of Applied Physiology, and this is one of the first studies that actually looked at intermittent fasting's effect on insulin sensitivity compared to baseline. So what they did is they took subjects and they had them do intermittent fasting every second day. Okay, so a 20-hour fast every second day for 15 days. So that's really not even that many days of fasting. It was like, what, 6-7 days of fasting over a 15-day period. Okay? And what they were looking at is, well, how did their insulin sensitivity improve from beginning to end? Well, they found their insulin-mediated glucose uptake into the cells had increased significantly. It increased from 6.3 milligrams per kilogram per minute, absorption, uptake into the cell. It increased to 7.3 milligrams per kilogram per minute. That's a big increase. Okay, we're talking a pretty significant, like 15-ish% increase in just 15 days in terms of how fast insulin was able to suck glucose into a cell. This is tremendously positive news for intermittent fasting because we do want to be insulin sensitive. But it also comes with a bit of bad news if you want to twist it that way. They also found there's a greater insulin-induced inhibition of lipolysis. Remember, lipolysis is mobilization of fats. So because they were more sensitive to insulin, when they did eat food, and they did eat carbohydrates, it had a more pronounced, amplified effect in terms of stopping fat burning. So what does this mean? Essentially, how we can liken this is you either have a Ferrari, which has a lot of potential, has a lot of performance, but also is high maintenance and is kind of a pain in the butt. And compare that to a Honda Civic, which maybe you're not getting a lot of performance in that little four-banger, but yeah, whatever. I mean, you only have to change the oil every 30,000 miles. Maybe that's all you have to do with it, right? It's like with great power comes great responsibility. So now that you are more insulin sensitive because you have made your body a more fine-tuned machine, you have to be more aware of what you take into your body. And I know that might sound sketchy and even orthorexic to some, that now you have to become obsessed with what you eat. You don't have to become obsessed, but you have opened up a pathway that's allowed you to be more sensitive to this thing that can be either very, very good for you or very, very bad for you. Now, they also found there was an increase in adenopectin. Now, what this means is that adenopectin can drive the effect of GLUT4, bringing glucose into a fat cell. So that means that insulin now has a more pronounced effect at potentially causing more fat accumulation. What does this mean? Well, have you noticed that if you do intermittent fasting for a while, or you do keto for a while, and then you have some carbohydrates, it's like you gain fat a lot faster than before? Or compared to your friends that aren't doing keto, it's like your friends that aren't doing keto can eat 600 grams of carbohydrates, and maybe it doesn't do them a positive service, but they don't gain a bunch of fat. But you have 600 grams of carbohydrates and you feel like you gain fat. There's a good chance that you actually do gain more fat from those 600 grams of carbohydrates than your friends do. Why? Because you are more sensitive to the negative effect of insulin, right? So that adenopectin result for you is going to drive up more de novo lipogenesis, okay? So with this, it's not to scare you, but once you go down that path of becoming insulin sensitive, it doesn't give you a license to have a bunch of carbohydrates, because that's where people get confused. Oh, I'm insulin sensitive. Now I can have carbohydrates and they're not going to impact me as much. No, now you can get by with less carbohydrates doing the same thing, is what it means. You're more sensitive. So now you can do with 30 grams of carbohydrates what you used to have 50 to do. That's the point of insulin sensitivity, not so that you can take all 50 and do more with them. As always, keep it locked in here on my channel, and I'll see you tomorrow.